Buenos días a todos. Buenos días, noches a todos los que siguen su canal. Hoy voy a hablar de Daniel capítulo 7 en inglés. Los que quieran oírlo en español, aquí tienen el enlace. Good morning, evening, afternoon to whoever follows this channel. I am Victor Tellez. Today's transmission will be regarding the chapter 7 of the prophecy of Daniel, the prophecy of the four beasts. For those who want to follow it in Spanish, excuse me, for those of you who want to follow it in Spanish, you have here the link to the Spanish content of it. Today, the church all over the world reads the prophecy of Daniel, the prophecy of the four beasts. But like with all other prophecies, it is important to understand a few things. The book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, they are written in what's called apocalyptic writing, which means that they are very, very symbolic. And to properly understand the symbolism, you must understand who is writing and who they are writing for. In this case, Daniel is writing, and he tells us this is in the first year of Belshazzar, which is about the year 546 BC. He is writing regarding this prophecy that he received right when the time for the collapse of Babylon was imminent. Let's see. He wrote it in Aramaic, not Hebrew. The book of Daniel was not written in Hebrew. It was in Aramaic. We can tell this by the way certain words are used when you try and read it in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh. Now, having said this, let's dive right in. And remember, to properly understand the prophecy, you need to know history. If you do not know history, you will not understand it properly. You need to understand what the situation is. The situation in the book of Daniel is that the people of Israel were taken captive by the Babylonians. You see, in the year 586 BC, roughly about 50 years before this prophecy was written, the Babylonians invaded Israel and took some people prisoners, among them Daniel and his friends. He forced them to forget Hebrew and to learn Aramaic. And even though Daniel was put at the service of the Roman emperor, he never forgot his Jewish ancestries. And even though he was serving as part of the Babylonian government, he still longed for the time when Israel could go back to Israel, to their proper homeland. Therefore, a lot of symbolism here in this prophecy is directly connected to the symbolism of the different cultures of the time. Let's begin. It is Daniel chapter 7, verses 4 through 12. Let's see. Actually, verses 2 to 12. In the vision I saw during the night, suddenly the four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea. Now, we're hearing about the four winds of heaven. Every time we see the number 4 in this kind of prophecy, it's telling us about worldwide. You see, what's about to happen was affecting the entire world that was known at that time. North, south, east, west. 4 points on the compass represents the entire planet, or at least a portion of the planet that Daniel knew in his time. Let's continue seeing. And we see that the seas are having a strong winds. What does that tell you? there's a storm, there's something major, there's a problem, there's something important coming from the sea. The sea was a symbol of chaos, a symbol of disorder, a symbol of hell. Now, as we continue reading, we see that next things come up. It tells us, from which emerged the four beasts, each one different from the others. So you have four monsters that come up from the sea, four beasts. Now, let's look at the first one, verse 4. The first was like a lion, but with eagle's wings. A lion with eagle's wings. Let's go back and remember, we're talking about Babylon here. You will remember that every country, every kingdom, every city has what is called a heraldry, a heraldic sign, a symbol that represents it. If we talk about the United States, we have the symbol of an eagle. If we talk about Mexico, we're going to have the symbol of another eagle. If we talk about Guatemala, they're going to have the symbol of a quetzal bird. If we talk about Russia, they're going to have a polar bear as its symbol, and so on. So now we're talking about a lion with wings. A lion with wings in the time of Daniel was called a shatu. Today we call him a griffin, but in biblical times it was called a shatu. And this was the symbol for none other than the Babylonian Empire. You can still see, for example, pieces of archaeology that displays lions with wings, representing the power that ancient Babylon had from the time of Nabonassar towards the end of the 6th century BC up until its collapse in the year 539 BC. So we see a lion with wings. This represents the empire of the Babylonians. But let's see what happens. It says, while I watched, the wings were plucked. It was raised from the ground to stand on 2 feet like a human being and given a human mind. Now, this is now making reference back to the 4th chapter of Daniel. You see, as you're reading the book of Daniel, you're going to find that that in the 4th chapter, we see, it tells us that God humiliated Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, because he was walking by his gardens and decided to be arrogant. Oof, I built this empire. Oof, these buildings are my doing. Oof, I rule the whole world. That was the attitude Nebuchadnezzar had. So he gets stricken by a disease that today is known as lycanthropia. And this disease, it was a mental disease. And all of a sudden, he gets some kind of craziness going in him that he starts thinking he's an animal. He becomes humiliated. And Nebuchadnezzar spent 70 years living in a cave like an animal, only going out to eat grass like another animal. In other words, he was humiliated. The arrogance that Nebuchadnezzar had once had was destroyed. That's why it's telling us the wings of this lion, the power of Babylon, the power of which Nebuchadnezzar was so arrogant, was taken from him as he was humiliated, being brought down from his throne to the fields like an animal. Therefore, it tells us the wings of this beast are plucked up. He is humiliated. He's brought down from his high and mighty position. And so it's also telling us that the very arrogance that Belshazzar, the successor of Nebuchadnezzar, is to experience that the once mighty Babylonian Empire is going to be humiliated just like years before his emperor, its king, was too humiliated. But then he tells us that this lion that lost his wings, this lion that was humiliated, now stands up and walks like a man. In chapter 4 of Daniel, we find out that when Nebuchadnezzar understands that he is not powerful and mighty in himself, but that he receives his power from the hand of God, and he admits to it, then he gets elevated back to his throne. That's why it's telling us that this lion, the king of Babylon, was humiliated in the time of Nebuchadnezzar and then raised back to the status of a human being. And so, too, Babylon is to be put to shame in a very short time. That's why it tells us afterwards in verse 5, the second beast was like a bear. He was raised up on one side, and among the teeth in its mouth were 3 tusks. It was given the order, arise, devour much flesh. So this is another empire. The Babylonian Empire collapses in the year 539 BC. And in its place, we have a bear walking lopsided with 3 pieces of meat in its mouth. Why a bear? Well, to understand this, you need to understand what is called, what is known as angelology, which is the study of angels in very primitive Judaism and Christianity. And it was believed that there are 9 choirs of angels. One of them were the angels known as the principalities. Now, today we have the belief that every person has a guardian angel protecting that person. I have my guardian angel. My wife has her guardian angel. Each of my kids has their guardian angels, all watching over them. So too, it was with the nations. Every country had an angel watching after them. Michael, the archangel, for example, was an angel for Israel. The Arabs had their own angel known as a principality. And so too, the Persians had their own principality. The principality of the angel that watched over the Persians, his name was Dobiel, which in Hebrew it means the bear of God, God's bear, Dobiel. Now, so this bear that we see in this prophecy is Dobiel, the angel of the Persians, representing that the Persian Empire would rise up under Cyrus the Great and destroy the Babylonian Empire. But wait, you see that this Persian Empire destroyed 3 kingdoms. It had 3 pieces of in its mouth. If we look at the history and the biography of Cyrus the Great, we find out that Babylonia was a third of 3 powerful empires that Cyrus the Great had destroyed. First, he went and attacked the empire of Arphaxad, which was a primitive form of the Persian Empire before it was a fully Persian Empire. And he had also destroyed the empire of the Lydians in what is now Turkey. Those are 1 and 2. And the third king that Cyrus killed was Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So now we have 3 kings represented by the 3 pieces of meat in this bear's mouth. Notice he's walking lopsided. He's walking all crooked. He's walking on his side. Cyrus was the king of Elam, of the Elamites. but he had destroyed the kingdom of Arphaxad, which was of the Persians. So he was known as a king of Persians and Lydians. Technically, he was ruling two different kingdoms, two different empires. And yes, when one king rules two different territories, he's going to lean heavily more in support of one than the other, telling us that this Cyrus the Great, though he controls both Persia and Elam, he preferred more the side of the Elamites. So he's walking on his side, leaning more to one side instead of walking even in justice. And he is told to continue devouring more meat. In other words, after Cyrus the Great destroyed the previous representation, the previous dynasty of the Persian Empire, after he destroyed the Lydians, after he destroyed the Babylonian Empire, he was not done yet. His successors continued conquering parts of India, as well as Egypt. So the Persian Empire, after conquering the Babylonians, continues taking over more land. Verse 6. After this, I looked and saw another beast, like a leopard. The next beast emerges from a place that is represented. Remember, I told you about the heraldic symbols. There is a heraldic symbol in one of the many kingdoms that were in the area of Greece. From one of them came a very powerful Macedonian dynasty. The symbol for that city, if I remember correctly, it's a city of Argos, had as its symbol, as a royal seal, a leopard. So it's telling us that the next creature, the next monster that comes out from the sea is descendant from the city of Argos. Hence, the dynasty where he comes to rule is a Argonid dynasty. Now, in time, this powerful ruler starts taking over the empire. Let's see what happens with this leopard representing the city of Argos. On its back, it had 4 wings like those of a bird, and it had 4 heads. To this beast, dominion was given. So there was a ruler from the Macedonians who came into power with 4 wings. Wings representing how fast he conquered the world. You see, the Persian Empire was destroyed in the year 333 with the rise of the Greeks. When Alexander the Great inherits the Macedonian kingdom from his father, Philip II, he had in his command 4 generals: Antigonus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Lysimachus, Antipater, I think was the 4th one, but I don't quite remember. And turns out and from this 4th one was then quickly replaced by Seleucus. So you had 4 generals who worked well together while Alexander the Great was king. And very quickly, they took over the entire world, as it says here. Verse 6, to this beast dominion was given. Alexander the Great quickly rose to power with the aid of his four generals. And in 10 years, but in the year 323 BC, Alexander the Great, with just 20-something, 30-something years old, already conquered all of the world known by then. But notice what happens. Let's see, where were we? Verse 7. After these visions, in the vision of the night, I saw a fourth beast, terrifying, horrible, and of extraordinary strength. Now, wait, before we go on, we see that this beast, the leopard, has 4 heads. The 4 heads belong to each of the 4 wings. What happened is that after Alexander the Great died, he had no heirs because Alexander the Great was not interested in women. All he cared about was power, controlling the world. So he did not spend enough time with his queen, getting her pregnant with a child to heir the throne. So he had nobody to become king after him. So what happened was that his 4 generals, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, Antigonus, and Seleucus, started fighting over that kingdom, over the territory that had once been controlled and ruled by um, Alexander the Great. In time, we get the 4th beast, which is horrible. It's monstrous. Who destroyed the Greek Empire? Well, it was slowly taken over by Rome, the Roman Empire, not the church, not the Roman church, not Roman Catholicism. So nobody should ever confuse the church with Rome. Revelation 17 is clear. It talks about a city, not a church. Let's see what does it continue saying now. I saw a 4th beast, terrifying, horrible, and extraordinary strength. It had great iron teeth with which it devoured and crushed and trampled with its feet what was left. It differed from the beast that preceded it. It had 10 horns. The horn represents political power, not religious authority. So this beast had, of course, there were several different kings that ruled it, but there were 10 specific kings in Rome who declared war against his holy church, which were Nero, Domitian, Hadrian, Trajan, Valerian, Marcus Aurelius, Septimus Severus, Diocletian, Maxentius, and Licinius. These 10 were the 10 Roman emperors who decided to wage war against the Jews and against Christianity. These are the 10 horns described right here. And then it continues telling us it had 10 horns. I was considering the 10 horns it had, when suddenly a little horn sprang out of their midst, and 3 of the previous horns were torn away to make room for it. So now you see what is happening here. Out of the 10 horns, 3 horns get plucked out by one of them. This is a prophecy being announced to us 800 years before, how the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire was to begin. You see, in the second half of the 3rd century AD, we get what's called the crisis of the 3rd century, in which the Roman Empire started breaking up. During that time, an emperor called Carus was sitting on the throne, and he hires a very humble, supposedly humble, bodyguard for his son Carinus, because this Emperor Carus wants to share the power with his son Carinus. However, Carinus dies under suspicious conditions, and Diocletian, that bodyguard, runs away. He comes back and convinces the people to kill another Roman emperor. You see, after Carinus died, Emperor Carus gets his other son, Numerianus, to replace Carinus. But Diocletian comes back, gets the people to kill Numerianus. Carus, realizing the entire situation, declares war against Diocletian, but he too dies in very suspicious circumstances, and Diocletian becomes the king. Diocletian is the horn that destroys the other three horns. When this is the little horn that we see here that sprang out. He was little because he was a very lowly bodyguard at first, but then he grew, killed three of the horns, killed Carus, Carinus, and Numerianus, and now he becomes so powerful. Now this horn has grown in pride, in arrogance, and now he takes up the title for which is the name for which is he is known, Diocletian, which in Latin means golden god. In other words, he means superior to other gods, according to what he claims. Let's see what else happens. This horn had eyes like human eyes, and mouth that spoke arrogantly. Diocletian, eyes like a human eyes. In other words, and yet a mouth that was arrogant. In other words, he's telling us he is just a man. He is not a god, but he thinks he is a god. As I watched, the thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. Now you see, during the time that the Roman Empire was existing, judgment comes upon the world. You see, the Jews were expecting a Messiah. When is the Messiah going to come? When it will be the time for the Messiah? Daniel is telling him that the Messiah was to come during the fourth empire, not during the Babylonian Empire, not during the Persian Empire, not during the Greek Empire, but during the time of the Roman Empire. The King of Heaven was to come down to earth to execute judgment on the beast. It says the Ancient of Days. His clothing was white as snow, his purity, his holiness. The hair on his head like pure wool, and white, wisdom. His throne was flames of fire with wheels of burning fire. This makes reference to the book of Ezekiel. The wheels that accompanied the cherubim. A river of fire surged forth, flowing from where he sat. This river of fire is the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit that comes from God upon the earth. And myriads stood before him. The court was convened and the books were opened. Judgment is about to be executed. I watched then from the first of the arrogant words which the horn spoke. Unto the beast was slain, and the body destroyed and thrown into the burning fire. Roman Empire collapses and gets destroyed by the hand and the power of God Almighty. As for the other beasts, their dominion was taken away, but they were granted prolongation of life for a time and a season. Persia is still around. It's called Iran right now, but they cannot reconquer the dominion that the Persian Empire once had. The Greeks are still around. We still see Greece, but they can have never again risen to the might of power they once had. As for the visions during the night continued, I saw, okay, wait, here's the end. I saw the beast, they were granted prolongation of life for a time and a season. So they were to be around for just a bit longer, but no longer with the power they once waged. Why? Because who sits on the throne? Long live Christ the King!